Lake Serenity lived up to its name when I purchased my waterfront property 7 years ago. The crystal-clear waters reflected pine trees that rimmed the shore like silent guardians. Every weekend, I would wake before dawn to witness the sun painting the sky in watercolor hues of orange, pink, and purple. The lake became my sanctuary, my escape from the corporate world where I spent my weekdays. The property came with a basic wooden platform extending into the water, but I had dreams of something more substantial. Over the course of 6 months, I designed and built my dream dock by hand. I selected each cedar plank for its grain and strength, installed marine-grade hardware that would withstand the elements, and constructed a covered pavilion at the far end where I could sit during summer storms and watch lightning dance across the water. My neighbors admired the craftsmanship. Some even asked for my help with their own waterfront projects. The lakeside community operated with an unspoken code of respect for each other's space and property. That harmony lasted until Marjorie Winters moved into the colonial house 3 doors down. Within 6 months of her arrival, Marjorie, known simply as Karen behind her back, managed to get herself elected as president of our homeowners association through what many considered a questionable emergency election. The previous president had resigned after a heated argument with Karen about his holiday decorations being excessively festive. Her reign began with petty enforcement notices. My mailbox was apparently 2 inches too low according to some obscure bylaw she had uncovered. My trash cans remained visible from the street for 30 minutes after collection, a violation that prompted a formal warning letter. My bird feeder allegedly attracted unauthorized wildlife. Each infraction came with threats of fines and hostile reminders of HOA regulations. I tolerated these annoyances, choosing peace over confrontation. But everything changed when a certified letter arrived demanding I address unauthorized modifications to my dock. The letter claimed my covered pavilion exceeded height restrictions and that the structure extended 12 inches beyond my water rights boundary. Both accusations were false. I had meticulously researched county regulations before building and secured all necessary permits. The dock was completely legal in every respect. When I tried to explain this to Karen during the next HOA meeting, she dismissed my permits as outdated and suggested the rules had changed. One Saturday morning, I spotted Karen on my property, measuring my dock with a tape measure. She had a clipboard in hand and was taking photographs while standing on my lawn. When confronted, she claimed to be conducting official HOA business and reminded me that easements gave her the right to inspect potential violations. What I did not realize then, what I could not have possibly imagined, was how desperately she coveted my dock. The first clue came when my neighbor Tom mentioned in passing that Karen's daughter had recently announced her engagement. The second clue arrived when landscapers began enhancing the community lakefront areas with wedding-friendly flowers and decorative stones. The final piece fell into place when I overheard Karen at our community mailboxes, describing to another resident the perfect lakeside wedding she was planning for her daughter Amanda. The wedding that would apparently feature a scenic covered dock extending into the water, a dock that sounded identical to mine. The conspiracy unfolded like a bad neighborhood drama on a Tuesday morning at our local coffee shop. I sat in the corner with my laptop, catching up on work emails when Karen entered with a younger woman I assumed was her daughter. They took the table beside me, completely oblivious to my presence behind my computer screen. "The ceremony will take place right at the end of the dock," Karen explained, her voice carrying that distinctive tone of someone who believes they are speaking about a certainty. "We will have chairs arranged in a semicircle facing the lake, with the floral arch positioned so the sunset creates the perfect backdrop for your vows. The description matched my dock down to the custom pergola I had added last summer. I remained perfectly still, straining to hear every detail of their conversation. Karen continued describing the wedding venue with alarming specificity, mentioning the charming covered pavilion and the wide cedar planks that would accommodate the wedding party. "But is it really available for the date we want?" her daughter asked, sounding concerned. "June weddings book up so quickly." Karen laughed with dismissive confidence. "Trust me, Amanda. The community dock is available whenever we need it. As HOA president, I have priority access to all neighborhood amenities." Community dock. The words echoed in my head as I realized the full scope of her deception. My private property had apparently been reclassified in her mind as a community asset she could commandeer at will. 3 days later came the performance I had been expecting. Karen appeared at my front door holding a plate of store-bought cookies, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Good morning, neighbor," she trilled. "I wanted to ask a small favor. My daughter Amanda is getting married this summer, and we were hoping to use the community dock for some wedding photos. Nothing major, just a few quick shots with the bridal party." Her deliberate mischaracterization confirmed my suspicions. I maintained a neutral expression while explaining that my dock was private property, not a community amenity. Karen's smile never faltered, but her eyes hardened as she insisted that all waterfront structures fell under HOA jurisdiction for special events. "Perhaps you misunderstood the bylaws," she suggested with condescending patience. "All water access points are considered shared resources during approved community functions." I requested she show me this regulation in writing. She promised to email the relevant documentation, but never did. Instead, I began my own investigation through careful conversations with neighbors. Tom revealed that Karen had been showing her daughter and the wedding planner around my property for months, describing it as practically community property under HOA jurisdiction. My attorney drafted a certified letter clearly denying permission for any use of my dock. The response arrived swiftly, but not from Karen directly. The next day, every mailbox in our development contained an emergency HOA meeting notice. The primary agenda item read, "Clarification of water access structures ownership and usage rights." The meeting itself was a masterclass in bureaucratic manipulation. Karen stood before a PowerPoint presentation featuring slides labeled Community Enhancement Opportunities and Shared Waterfront Access Initiative. She proposed a bylaw amendment that would retroactively classify all docks and piers as dual-purpose structures, available for community events with board approval. As she spoke about maximizing neighborhood resources, I watched several neighbors exchange knowing glances. Years of her petty tyranny had created potential allies among the community. The retired judge 3 doors down frowned deeply at the legal implications. The architect across the street shook his head at each misleading point. When the meeting opened for questions, I calmly presented my property deed and water rights documentation. Karen attempted to interrupt repeatedly, but the evidence was clear. The vote on her proposed amendment was tabled for further legal review, but the wedding date remained circled in red on the community calendar she had prominently displayed. I needed to organize my allies before that date arrived. That evening, I invited several neighbors for an informal gathering to discuss recent HOA developments. The foundation for resistance was being laid, but time was running short. Karen's determination to secure my dock for her daughter's perfect wedding was clearly not going to be derailed by mere legal documents or property rights. The invasion of my property began at dawn, 48 hours before the scheduled wedding. The sharp chime of my security camera alerts jolted me awake at 6:17 a.m. I grabbed my phone to see three white vans with Lakeside Elegance Wedding Services painted on their sides pulling into my driveway. Sleep evaporated instantly as I threw on a bathrobe and rushed downstairs. By the time I made it outside, workers in crisp white uniforms were already unloading equipment. Flowers, fabric swatches, lighting fixtures, and sound equipment formed growing piles on my lawn. A woman with a tablet directed traffic like a field marshal, pointing workers toward different areas of my property. Half the dock was already draped in white fabric before I could even process what was happening. I approached the woman with the tablet, who introduced herself as Diane, the wedding planner. Her professional smile faltered when I explained that this was private property and no event had been authorized. "There must be some mistake," Diane said, genuine confusion crossing her face. Mrs. Winters provided written authorization on HOA letterhead. She assured us this was the approved venue for her daughter's wedding. She produced a document bearing Corinne's flamboyant signature, authorizing use of the Lake Serenity community dock and adjacent grounds for Amanda Winters' wedding ceremony. The letterhead looked official, complete with the HOA logo, but the document was a complete fabrication. "This is not a community dock," I explained, trying to maintain my composure. "This is my private property. The HOA has no authority to grant permission for its use." Diane looked genuinely distressed. "We have a contract. Deposits have been paid. The wedding is the day after tomorrow." She gestured to her crew, who continued transforming my property despite our conversation. I called the police. Officer Reynolds arrived 20 minutes later, reviewed both my property documentation and Corinne's fabricated authorization letter. He seemed uncomfortable standing between me and the dozen wedding professionals who continued their work while we talked. "This appears to be a civil matter, not criminal," he explained apologetically. "Without a court order, I cannot remove them. Your best option is to file for an emergency injunction, but that will take time." No sooner had the police cruiser left my driveway than Corinne herself appeared, flanked by 3 HOA board members. The smug satisfaction on her face told me everything I needed to know about who had orchestrated this early morning invasion. "We received complaints about your interference with approved community functions," she announced loudly enough for the workers to hear. "The board has convened an emergency session and determined that any obstruction of the wedding preparations could result in substantial fines under Section 8 of our bylaws." The board members behind her looked uncomfortable but remained silent. 2 were recent appointees selected by Corinne herself. The third avoided eye contact completely, suggesting the emergency session may have been less formal than she implied. I spent the morning on the phone with my attorney, who confirmed my property rights but delivered the frustrating truth. "Legal remedies will take time you do not have," he explained. "The earliest a judge could hear an emergency injunction would be Monday, 3 days after the wedding." He advised me to document everything, but warned against actions that could expose me to liability. "Let them have their wedding," he suggested. "Then we will pursue damages and penalties afterward." Throughout the day, my property transformed into Wedding Central. Workers installed a flower-covered arch precisely where I enjoyed my morning coffee. Rows of white chairs replaced the casual seating area I had built. String lights wrapped around railings that I had stained by hand. Each addition felt like an erasure of my personal space, a violation of boundaries both literal and figurative. Karen made multiple inspection visits throughout the day, each time ignoring me as if I were a minor inconvenience rather than the property owner. During her final visit, as sunset painted the lake in ironically beautiful hues, she stood at the end of my dock with her daughter, gesturing to the horizon. "The ceremony will end just as the sun touches the water," she explained. "It will be absolutely perfect." By nightfall, my beloved dock had been transformed into a wedding fantasy that bore no resemblance to the peaceful retreat I had built with my own hands. White fabric draped every surface. Floral arrangements stood at attention like soldiers. A small platform for musicians occupied the space where I normally placed my reading chair. As I stood at my window looking at the transformed landscape, anger gave way to determination. If legal channels could not provide timely justice, perhaps there were other solutions to explore. Solutions that required engineering rather than litigation. Sleepless at midnight, I stared at my bedroom ceiling fan spinning lazy circles in the darkness. The distant glow of security lights illuminated the wedding decorations on my dock, a constant reminder of the invasion. I had almost resigned myself to defeat when the memory surfaced like a life preserver thrown to a drowning man. The dock, my dock, had been constructed with contingencies for the severe storms that occasionally swept across Lake Serenity. After losing a previous structure to hurricane-force winds 3 years before I purchased the property, I had engineered this one with disaster prevention in mind. I slipped out of bed and descended to the basement where I kept my construction plans and tools. Under the single bulb of my work lamp, I unrolled the detailed blueprints I had created when building the dock. There, in the technical specifications, were the features I had almost forgotten: the discrete quick-release mechanisms designed to allow the main platform to detach from the shore anchors when needed. The floating section could be secured to underwater moorings during normal conditions, but released to ride out extreme weather when necessary. I had installed 4 underwater cables attached to concrete blocks on the lake bottom that prevented the floating structure from drifting away completely during storms. The system had only been activated once during a severe thunderstorm 2 summers ago. My garage workbench became command central as I reviewed the plans by flashlight, not daring to turn on the main lights that might alert Karen's network of nosy neighbors. The original design called for manual release of the shore connections, physically removing bolts that secured the floating platform to the permanent pilings. But after that thunderstorm, I had upgraded to a remote-controlled system using marine-grade electronic releases that could be activated from shore. The question now was whether those mechanisms were still operational after months of disuse, and whether they could be activated without being detected by the wedding decorators who would return at dawn to complete their work. I needed to understand the legal implications before proceeding. The lake itself fell under different jurisdictional rules than shoreline property, a legal gray area between county regulations and federal waterway provisions. 3 hours of research on my laptop confirmed my suspicions. Once floating freely, my dock would become a vessel subject to maritime rules rather than fixed property regulations. As a vessel, I would have captain's rights to direct its movement so long as I ensured the safety of any persons aboard. My attorney had mentioned documenting everything. This would certainly qualify as comprehensive documentation of property rights enforcement. The hardware store opened at 6. I was first in line, purchasing a compact but powerful trolling motor and remote control system advertised for fishing boats. The salesman helpfully explained how the system could be adapted for larger watercraft, unaware of my specific application. I also purchased a marine battery, waterproof wire connectors, and a high-visibility orange safety kit with emergency flares and life preservers. Under cover of pre-dawn darkness, I slipped into the water beneath my transformed dock. The cold lake water shocked my system awake as I dove beneath the surface with a waterproof flashlight. The maintenance hatches I had built into the underside of the floating platform remained accessible despite the wedding decorations above. The release mechanisms appeared intact but required cleaning after months underwater. I worked quickly, aware that the wedding decorators would return soon. The electronic release controls responded to system tests, green indicator lights confirming operational status. The trolling motor installation was more complicated, requiring secure mounting to the underside of the platform where it would remain invisible from above. A test of the float capability, releasing the dock just 3 feet from shore while secured by safety lines, proved the platform would maintain stability even with the added weight of wedding decorations. The platform settled slightly lower in the water but remained well above the water line. As the first hints of sunrise colored the eastern sky, I made final adjustments to the remote control system. The dual-channel controller would allow separate activation of the release mechanisms and the trolling motor. Range tests confirmed operation from up to 50 yards away, more than enough distance to control the dock from shore while remaining inconspicuous among wedding guests. By 7 a.m., as the first wedding vehicles arrived to continue preparations, I had completed my countermeasures. The dock appeared unchanged from above, still festooned with flowers and fabric, but was now prepared for a very different kind of celebration than Corinne had planned. I spent the remaining day before the wedding methodically documenting property lines and collecting evidence. I photographed my original property stakes, the survey markers, and the deed description that clearly defined my ownership to the water line and specific water rights extending into the lake. I visited the local Coast Guard Auxiliary Office, inquiring about regulations governing temporarily detached floating structures in Lake Serenity. The officer provided helpful documentation about navigation rules and safety requirements, which I added to a growing folder of legal justification. By sunset on the day before the wedding, I had the calculations, the equipment, and most importantly, the legal justification for what would become the most satisfying revenge of my life. As I watched the final wedding rehearsal from my kitchen window, I felt a sense of calm resolve replace the anger that had consumed me for days. Tomorrow, Corinne Winters would learn an important lesson about respecting property rights, a lesson delivered in spectacular fashion before an audience of wedding guests who had no idea they would become unwitting participants in her public humiliation. The wedding day arrived with picture-perfect weather that seemed almost cruel in its perfection. Cloudless blue skies stretched over Lake Serenity, with just enough breeze to create gentle ripples on the water surface. The kind of day that wedding photographers dream about, and that I had come to dread. From my bedroom window, I watched the first vehicles arrive shortly after 10 in the morning. Catering trucks, florist vans, and a mobile hair and makeup studio parked along my driveway as if they owned the place. Workers in formal black attire unloaded equipment while following directions shouted by Diane, the increasingly frazzled wedding planner. By noon, my property had transformed into Wedding Central. White chairs gleamed in perfect rows leading to the dock. A string quartet set up in the shade of my oak tree. Catering tables lined the side yard, laden with champagne flutes and elegant appetizers. All of this occurred while I remained inside my home, carefully documenting every trespass with time-stamped photographs. The first limousines arrived at 1 o'clock, disgorging bridesmaids in matching blue dresses who immediately began taking selfies on my lawn. The groomsmen followed in a separate vehicle, adjusting cufflinks and straightening ties as they wandered across my property as if visiting a public park. Karen appeared at 2, resplendent in a lavender mother-of-the-bride dress with a diamond brooch that caught the sunlight. She carried herself with the authority of someone who had achieved total victory. A smug smile played at her lips as she directed caterers through my side gate, pointing imperiously at various locations. "The champagne station goes near those hydrangeas," she instructed, gesturing toward bushes I had nurtured for 5 seasons. "The gift table belongs under the pergola, and make sure the guest book stand has an unobstructed view of the water." I maintained careful composure, my smartphone recording continuously from my shirt pocket as I documented the invasion. The remote control unit sat heavy in my other pocket, its presence a constant reminder of the plan now set in unavoidable motion. Guests began arriving at 2:30, dressed in formal attire that seemed excessive for a lakeside event. Women in elaborate hats and men in suits created a procession from the street to my backyard. Not one person questioned why they were walking across private property or expressed concern about the legitimacy of the venue. The wedding procession began at precisely 3 o'clock. The string quartet played Pachelbel's canon as attendants created a path of rose petals across my lawn leading to my dock. Bridesmaids processed in practice steps, followed by flower girls who scattered additional petals with choreographed precision. The bride appeared in blinding white, escorted by her father toward the floral arch now anchored at the far end of my dock. 30 folding chairs accommodated immediate family on the dock itself, with remaining guests standing on shore to witness the ceremony. Karen sat prominently in the front row, champagne flute already in hand, occasionally turning to ensure everyone noticed her emotional mother-of-the-bride expressions. From my hidden position beside the boathouse, I watched the officiant begin the ceremony. Phrases about unbreakable bonds and unions blessed by nature itself drifted across the water toward me. The irony was not lost on me as I fingered the remote control in my pocket. The ceremony progressed through readings and music. A vocalist sang something about endless love while guests dabbed at their eyes with monogrammed handkerchiefs. The couple exchanged vows written on elegant stationery, promises of devotion floating across my property without permission. As the officiant announced, "If anyone can show just cause why this couple cannot lawfully be joined together in matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace," I almost laughed at the cosmic timing. Instead, I activated the first release mechanism with a soft click of the remote in my pocket. So gentle was the initial movement that no one noticed for nearly 30 seconds. The floating section of dock disengaged from the permanent pilings with only the softest of bumps. The wedding party remained completely unaware as physics slowly took over, the breeze gradually moving the platform away from shore. The first indication something was amiss came when Karen's champagne flute tilted slightly, sending expensive bubbles cascading over the rim. She frowned at the glass, then at the water surrounding the dock. Her expression transformed from smug satisfaction to dawning horror as her brain processed what her eyes were seeing: the growing gap of blue water between the wedding party and the shoreline. The bride faltered mid-vow, her attention drawn to her mother's sudden movement. "Is the dock moving?" she asked, her voice carrying clearly across the water. That single question triggered the first screams as guests realized they were indeed floating away from shore. The officiant grabbed the arch for stability, inadvertently pulling it off balance. Bridesmaids clutched each other while the groom stood frozen in confusion. Karen pushed to the edge of the dock, her lavender dress drawing a sharp line against the blue water as she screamed toward shore. "What is happening? Someone do something!" From my position near the boathouse, now clearly visible to all, I raised the bullhorn I had purchased the previous day. My voice carried across the water with satisfying clarity. "Ladies and gentlemen, you are currently floating on private property being used without owner permission or authorization. Please remain calm. The structure is completely safe and will be repositioned to the center of the lake momentarily." Karen spotted me then, recognition and rage crossing her face in equal measure. She pointed a trembling finger in my direction, her voice reaching operatic heights. "You stop this immediately. Do you know who these people are?" I activated the second remote function. The trolling motor engaged with a quiet hum, propelling the wedding party farther from shore at a steady, safe pace. Karen's continued screams faded slightly with distance, though her gestures remained animated enough to nearly topple her into the water. The wedding guests stood in stunned silence, formal attire and fixed smiles creating a surreal tableau as they drifted toward the center of Lake Serenity. The bride sat down heavily in the nearest chair, her enormous dress pooling around her like a deflated parachute. The perfect wedding day was floating away from shore, 1 inch at a time, and there was absolutely nothing Karen Winters could do about it. Chaos erupted on the floating platform as reality dawned on 50 well-dressed guests, now adrift 20 yards from shore. Women clutched fascinator hats against the freshening breeze, while men in rented tuxedos crowded the edges, calculating the swim distance in increasingly panicked voices. "My phone has no signal. Someone call 911. Is this some kind of joke?" The wedding party transformed from elegant celebration to maritime emergency in a matter of minutes. Bridesmaids clustered together in blue huddles while groomsmen debated whether to remove their jackets. The bride remained seated, shock rendering her immobile as her carefully planned day disintegrated around her. Karen bulldozed through the crowd, designer heels threatening to puncture my dock's surface as she reached the closest edge to shore. Her carefully styled hair whipped around her face in the breeze, her lavender dress now wrinkled from pushing through panicked guests. "Fix this immediately," she shrieked toward shore, mascara already beginning to run despite the absence of tears. "This is criminal. You are ruining my daughter's wedding." I stood calmly at the water's edge, bullhorn in hand, purchased specifically for this moment. The weight of my documentation folder provided reassuring heft under my arm as I addressed the floating party. "You are currently trespassing on private property being used without permission," I announced, voice carrying clearly across the expanding gap of blue water. Mrs. Winters was informed in writing that this dock is private property, not community property as she falsely claimed. The vessel will be safely repositioned to the center of the lake while authorities are contacted. The small trolling motor engaged with my next remote command, propelling the wedding party further from shore at a deliberate pace that kept everyone perfectly safe yet thoroughly inconvenienced. 20 yards became 30, then 40, the distance eliminating any thought of an easy swim to shore. Cell phones emerged from formal clutches and inside pockets, but Lake Serenity's notoriously poor reception created a dispatcher nightmare. Guests raised phones overhead, turning in circles seeking signal bars that refused to appear. The wedding planner Diane attempted to restore order, but her clipboard authority diminished with each yard of separation from land. "Everyone please remain calm," she announced with professional poise that belied the panic in her eyes. "I am sure this is just a misunderstanding that will be resolved quickly." Two older guests in their 60s, apparently with competitive swimming backgrounds, made executive decisions about their predicament. They stripped down to undergarments with surprising efficiency and executed graceful dives from the far side of the dock, heading for shore with determined freestyle strokes. Their dignified exit inspired several younger men to consider similar escape, but the increasing distance made most reconsider. The groom attempted to console his bride, who had progressed from shocked silence to tearful devastation. Her elaborate makeup created dark rivers down her cheeks as she watched her perfect day literally drift away. The officiant, demonstrating admirable commitment to his role, stood nearby asking if they wanted to complete the ceremony despite the circumstances. Through my binoculars, I observed Karen commandeering the satellite phone from the wedding photographer's emergency kit. Her triumphant expression suggested she had found a solution to the communication problem. Within 10 minutes, the distinctive sound of a Coast Guard patrol boat engine rumbled from around the lake's northern bend. The white vessel with orange stripping approached cautiously, responding to reports of a structure with civilians adrift. The officer's confusion was evident as he guided his patrol boat alongside the flower-bedecked platform with a half-completed wedding frozen in tableau. "Coast Guard Auxiliary," he announced, taking in the surreal scene of formal attire, wedding decorations, and panicked guests. "Who is in charge here?" Karen pushed forward immediately. "I am Marjorie Winters, president of the Lake Serenity Homeowners Association. This man," she pointed dramatically toward shore, "has electronically hijacked our community dock during an approved event. I demand immediate assistance and his arrest." The Coast Guard officer, Lieutenant Wilson according to his nameplate, maintained professional composure as he secured his vessel alongside the drifting dock. He radioed for backup while assessing the situation, particularly concerned about the stability of the structure and safety of passengers. When the Coast Guard vessel approached shore to investigate, I presented my folder of documentation, property deeds, dock permits, construction plans, and time-stamped photographs of the trespassing. Lieutenant Wilson reviewed the materials with increasing interest as I explained the situation. "The dock was built on my property, by me personally, with all proper permits," I explained. "Mrs. Winters was informed repeatedly, and in writing that this is private property, not community property as she claimed to the wedding party. I activated safety features I built into the dock, features designed for emergency weather situations, to remove trespassers from my property after police declined to intervene." As I presented evidence of ownership and prior warnings, Karen continued screaming increasingly creative threats from her floating prison, now perfectly positioned in the lake's deepest section. Her voice carried across the water, promises of lawsuits and social destruction competing with the Coast Guard radio chatter. Lieutenant Wilson requested documentation from the HOA validating Karen's claims about community property and approved events. The wedding planner reluctantly admitted that all contracts listed Karen Winters personally as the venue provider, not the homeowners association. The fraudulent authorization letter on HOA letterhead sealed Karen's fate as the officer's expression hardened with understanding. "So you falsified HOA documents to commandeer private property," he summarized, watching Karen's face flush deeper than her now wilted corsage. "That presents several serious legal issues beyond simple trespassing." The lieutenant radioed for additional vessels to begin passenger evacuation, while maintaining a diplomatic tone that barely concealed his assessment of the situation. As backup arrived and rescue operations commenced, Karen's reign of neighborhood terror visibly collapsed along with her carefully constructed facade of authority. The Coast Guard's rescue operation became the highlight of Lake Serenity's social calendar. Neighbors emerged from lakefront homes with binoculars and smartphones, documenting Corinne's ultimate downfall with the same enthusiasm she had once shown for documenting their minor HOA violations. The wedding party returned to shore via a procession of small rescue boats, bedraggled designer attire and smeared makeup creating a stark contrast to their earlier elegance. Guests wrapped in emergency blankets huddled in confused groups on the shoreline, attempting to process the extraordinary conclusion to what was supposed to be a joyous celebration. Corinne was last to disembark. Her lavender ensemble darkened with lake water after an unfortunate transfer between vessels that witnesses would later describe as completely accidental. She avoided eye contact with everyone, especially the bride and groom, as she hurried toward her car without her usual imperious posture. The community club parking lot transformed into an impromptu crisis center with emergency blankets and hot beverages for shivering guests. Whispered conversations spread the truth about Corinne's deception like wildfire through the assembled crowd. By evening, every resident of Lake Serenity had heard multiple versions of how the HOA president had fabricated community ownership of private property for her daughter's wedding. 3 days later, an emergency HOA meeting achieved record attendance. The community clubhouse exceeded fire code capacity as residents packed in to address the dock incident and its implications. Evidence of Corinne's misrepresentations was presented by previously intimidated board members suddenly finding their courage in the face of overwhelming community support. Her removal from the HOA presidency required only 15 minutes of deliberation. The vote was unanimous, including abstentions from Corinne's former allies who strategically visited restrooms during the crucial moment. Corinne herself did not attend, citing medical concerns, though neighbors reported seeing her loading suitcases into her car that same morning. The certified letter from my attorney arrived at her home the following day, outlining potential trespassing charges and property damages. However, it included a settlement option requiring public apology and resignation from all community positions she no longer held anyway. Her acceptance came via her own attorney within hours, suggesting a rare moment of wisdom in assessing her legal position. The bride herself appeared at my door 1 week later, alone and visibly uncomfortable. Amanda Winters had inherited her mother's height, but apparently none of her entitled demeanor. She twisted her engagement ring nervously as she offered a sincere apology. She told us it was community property, she confessed, eyes downcast. I never would have agreed to use someone's private dock. We were told everything was approved and legitimate. I am so sorry for what happened. Her genuine remorse made it impossible to maintain anger toward her. The true villain had always been Corinne, using her daughter's special day as justification for property theft. I accepted Amanda's apology and wished her well in her new marriage, which had apparently been completed in a courthouse ceremony 2 days after the lake incident. The following spring brought new HOA leadership focused on actual community improvements rather than personal vendettas. Property values around Lake Serenity increased as the neighborhood's reputation for drama faded into cooperative governance and reasonable rule enforcement. My dock, restored to its original peaceful state after professional removal of all wedding hardware, featured new additions: a security camera system, clear private property signage, and a discreet lockbox containing the quick-release remote control, just in case another Corinne emerged from the community's depths. The incident became neighborhood legend, shared at barbecues and community gatherings as a cautionary tale about respect for boundaries. Some lessons, after all, deserve to be remembered, especially those learned while drifting in formal wear toward the center of a lake on what should have been the perfect wedding day.